The article Canada's Race Problem, It's Even Worse Than America's, is an editorial from Maclean's magazine. Issue raised in the article is Canada's racism problem towards Aboriginal people. Purpose of the article is to convince readers that Canada has a racism problem towards its Aboriginal people. The author is convinced that the problem is being ignored by Canadian population. To show that the issue has been prevalent in today's society, Scott Gilmore mentions recent news about Aboriginal people in Ottawa-Piscot, where band administrators make profit of their own people. Other citations the author utilizes to support his claim come from various statistics related to how Aboriginal people are positioned in Canadian society and in comparison to the African American people in the U.S. According to the statistics, Aboriginal people of Canada are inferior to the African American population of America in several categories: unemployment rate, dropout rate, and infant mortality rate. These categories represent economic, health, and educational status of the group in Canadian society. In general, the article argues that Aboriginal people face racial inequality issues in Canada, but are for some reason neglected. The video will view the issue from functionalist, conflict, and symbolic interaction sociology perspectives. We will also discuss the given article utilizing such terms as ethnocentrism, Eurocentrism, and cultural relativism.
Functionalism asserts that the race problem in Canada is worse than in America. Aboriginal people in Canada live on a reserve. They have their own historical structure separate from the Canadian government, whereby they are responsible for their people. They are permitted to hunt for a living, but they are not permitted to live both on the reserves and still contribute to the society outside the reserve. In this way, they have intro-functionalist theory, but as it is inserted within a larger working functionalist system of the Canadian government. 49% of the Canadian Aboriginal people choose to stay on the reserves. The largest Canadian city of Toronto has a large population with fewer than 40,000 Aboriginals living within Toronto. Canada's First Nation are still practicing tech traditions and are resistant to any technology. Canada's First Nation people generally have low educations, poor access to medical service, and little to no certainty to policing. In this way, Canadian Aboriginal people often live in the same conditions as those who lived 100 years ago. As a result, Aborigines who joined the general Canadian population century large far behind other citizens in terms of education.
Fragments of the article that are consistent with conflict theory are when it discusses how we have to speak out and share our ideas in order to resolve issues like the one in the article. Conflict theory suggests the fact that a society is held together by power and that conflict is society's natural state. This could be seen as a very sad and depressing way that our society functions. Although it also could be true because power could be seen as the element that controls everything based on authority. Sadly, conflict could be society's natural state because of the amount of argument and disagreement that we have between one another. However, this is what develops our society and makes it stronger based on the argument we have to make and what we believe in. When this article discusses how we as Canadians should be recognizing our attitude toward Aboriginal people, it is stating that we have to become aware of how poorly they are treated. Conflict theory is mainly expressed in the article through the fact that Aboriginal people are seen to have less power than the rest of our population because of they are a minority. Due to the fact that they have less power, they are treated the worst and are suffering because of it. In order to resolve this issue, we have to use the power we have to defend and speak out for them to protect them from the unsafe environment they are in.
Interactionist perspective generalizes about everyday forms of social interaction to explain society as a whole. Symbolic interaction theorists argue that the concept of race is an illusory meaning which was invented to rationalize slavery and to explain certain types of distinct inequality. Racism is what people act toward based on the meaning certain cultures have for them. In this particular case, meanings of Aboriginal cultures are derived from social interaction that occurred for the first time centuries ago between the white people and the Aboriginal people. Cultural bias towards unfamiliar and intolerance of others from the European descendant side led to Eurocentrism and racism. Racism is based on certain norms of interaction between different groups of people. Cultural bias formed historically still pursues members of different ethnic groups. People of one race are often expected to behave in a certain way or to have distinct features, and anything that does not fall under a certain category is considered a deviance. In this case, norms are expectations from Aboriginal people to be generally less educated, more prone to homicides, and to earn 40% less than an average Canadian. Looking at the article, symbolic interactionism theorists would disagree with the author, who claims that the acceptance of racism is the first step towards solving the issue. Because in symbolic interactionism, accepting racism means that people would start to act towards it. Therefore, from symbolic interactionism perspective, acceptance of the problem and use of ethnocentric language are not part of a solution for the problem of racism. One solution suggested by a devout believer in symbolic interactionism would be, however, to give up a conventional way of thinking about race. The term race could then perhaps operate not as a signifier of comprehensive identity, nor of fundamental difference, but rather as a marker of the infinity of variations we humans hold as a common heritage and hope for the future.
In conclusion, the racial matter is tolerated differently in both Canada and America. Even though Canada is ranked as the second worst country in the world for this issue, it is sad to say that we as Canadians have a worse race problem than the United States, which isn't seen or noticed by many. Therefore, the author offers solutions to solve the race problem by suggesting administrators to get banned. There is no logic to be seen behind the facts that are given to the media and thinking without being educated. The illustration was compared with the conditions between the African American community and Canada's First Nations by the judgments that are made by the society and how they treated the underprivileged. The author offers solutions to solve the race problem. It is agreed that there is no logic seen behind the facts given to the media and how media does not pay attention or believe their story about their disability or rights. America is thinking without being educated. The article can be broken down based on the three types of theories, beginning with functionalist theory, which is presented in the article when it discusses the issue that takes place in understanding the fact that the race problem in Canada is worse than in America. Also, the fact that in Canada, Aboriginal people live on reserves where they have their own structural hierarchy separate from the Canadian government. The next theory is conflict theory, and that is presented through the understanding that we have to speak out and share our ideas in order to create change and resolve issues like this. Lastly, symbolic interactionist theory is presented in the article when it discusses racism as an illusory meaning. Specifically, the fact that Aboriginal cultures are derived from social interaction that occurred centuries ago between white people and Aboriginal people. In general, Aboriginal people are looking for help, especially with the not-so-sharp number of immigrants in Black community that share the similar stories. For this to get fixed, we need to give it a moment and ask ourselves to admit that something is wrong. Then, taking a step higher and saying those words out loud for everyone to hear and make a change altogether. Canada has a race problem.